Let's get the latest on the ground now. I'm joined by military analyst and retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Sean, good to see you again. Let's start, shall we, with the fact that Ukraine seems to be using foreign fighters. We haven't talked much about this in the course of the war. We've known it's been going on, but what can you tell us about, what Sky News has discovered?
Yeah, well, both sides are using foreign fighters. We've been having a look at the Georgian fighters shown on the left here. They're particularly well motivated. They're particularly well trained. They're unified with Ukraine against a common enemy. And once the war is over, they will vacate back home. From a Russian perspective, the conscript army on the right is not performing well on the battlefield. Russia's therefore leaning more heavily on mercenary groups, like the Wagner group. The trouble with mercenaries, it's about their motivation. They're not motivation to serve their country, they're motivated about money. And the problem with that is that if they don't survive, they can't spend their money. So they're absolutely looking at self-preservation. The Wagner Group's worth a bit of a study in this because they are largely the front line of Russian efforts around the Donbass here. Yevgeny Prizovskin, who's the leader of the Wagner Group, is a convicted thief, but he's also a close personal ally of President Putin. As the Russian army's performance has not done well, actually, in Ukraine, then actually the role of the mercenaries has increased in value, and therefore Yevgeny's stock has also increased as it's building his power base. There's rumours that he's actually building some sort of people's militia on the western end of Russia, eastern side of the Donbass, and it's clear this is going to be outside Russian normal command and control, outside the Russian military. The question is, what's the agenda? And that's always the worry when you use mercenary groups. You're never quite sure what they're going to be doing in the future.
Both sides need more manpower. We've just heard from Moscow in the last few minutes that Vladimir Putin saying 50,000 Russians are now serving in combat units. So it's not just about recruiting manpower, but it's about recruiting firepower as well.
Yes, you can't just because you've got soldiers on the ground, you also need to match that with military equipment. And of course, with an enduring war, neither side has got enough equipment in its inventory or its war stocks. So both sides need help. At the moment, Ukraine is looking to the West for high technology support with ammunition, with mortars, with guns and anti-tank weapons. But Russia's also looking for help, but it doesn't have quite that same level of support. It leans towards China potentially, but China may be a natural ally, but doesn't want to be seen to be supporting Russia in the war. Russia's looked to Iran, and they've provided these Shahed 136 drones. They've also been asked potentially to provide surface-to-air missiles. But the fact remains that Russia has to be really careful how low it runs its stocks, because, of course, it leaves the country vulnerable to an attack from another nation if it runs it too low.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot, haven't we, over recent weeks about Russian drone power and where they're getting those drones from and their capability to make more of them themselves. But what they really want is military aircraft.
Yes, one of the things that we haven't reported much about is the Russian Air Force, which has not been dominant in this fight. The Russians haven't maintained air superiority over Ukraine, as a result of which Ukrainian airspace is an incredibly dangerous place for the Russian Air Force. Ukrainian claims that it's shot down 278 Russian military aircraft. That number, to put it into context, is over double the amount that the Soviets lost in their Afghan war. So it's a huge gap. Now, none of this can be verified at the moment, so we have to take it with a bit of pinch of salt. But even if it's close to being true, that leaves a massive hole in Russia's military capability. And you can't nip down to the supermarkets to buy spares of these. It takes years to replace them, and the pilots take years to train. So for Russia, this is leaving some pretty large holes that are going to take a long time to fill for Russia's Putin.
OK. Sean, thank you. We'll speak later on in the programme, but that's the update with what's happening in Ukraine.